Hi, this is a PowerPoint video about US taxes and, in particular, how they have changed over time. First of all, how do you evaluate something? You can't evaluate something on its own, alone, in a so called vacuum. You need a frame of reference to compare it to. So we need to look at history and were taxes higher before, were they lower before, and then later we'll look at other countries. And you need to look at both absolute numbers, that is the dollars we pay, and the percents. So let's first see how US taxes have changed over time. This is a graph of US government spending as a percent of GDP. Remember, GDP is gross domestic product. It's basically everything that a country makes in a year, all the products, add all their dollar values up together. And this is the spending as a percent of GDP. So going back to, say, 1900 when Teddy Roosevelt was president. What do you notice? Okay, what happens here? Does federal spending in general go up or does federal spending go down? And here you see 19 teens and 1940s, and there are two spikes. This is World War I and this is World War II. What happened to our spending during the wars? Then we had the Korean War, Vietnam War, and the Cold War, and our government made a lot of nuclear missiles, and that costs money. So what happened to federal government spending? Did it go up or did it go down? Here you see total tax revenue. Again, going back to 1900 to 2010, the blue shows you federal taxes, the red shows you how much the state governments take in tax, and the green shows you the local taxes. So do we take in, are most of our taxes federal, or are most of our taxes state, or are most of our taxes local? Now, let's look at federal taxes in particular. Where does most of the federal government money come from? Here you can see individual income taxes. That makes up about half of the federal government's money. Corporate income taxes are about 10% here, from 50 to 60%. That's a 10% wedge. And social payroll taxes like Social Security and Medicare, that is another 30% of the federal government taxes here. Okay, so where does the federal government get most of its money from? From which taxes? Here you see changes over time going back to 1946, and you see the payroll taxes have gone up or down. So Social Security and Medicare taxes have gone up or down in terms of where the federal government gets its money from. And corporate taxes, that's corporate taxes in dark green. Is the federal government getting more of its money now from corporate taxes or less of its money now from corporate taxes? Look at the changes over time. Payroll taxes, that's the Social Security tax and the Medicare tax. What's happened to them over time? This is a really important slide. Here are the poor, here are the rich, okay? So this is the lowest 20%, the poorest 20% of Americans. Their average income is about $13,000 a year. Here's the richest 1% of Americans. Their average income is about $1.3 million a year. The red shows you their share of total income. So the poorest 20% of Americans earn 3% of the nation's money. The top 1%, the richest 1% of Americans, earns 20% of the nation's money. And the blue shows you the share of total taxes paid. So the poorest 20% of Americans pay only 2% of the nation's taxes. The richest 1% pays 21% of the nation's taxes. Okay, so let's look at this again. The poorest 20% of Americans, they earn 3% of the nation's money, and they pay 2% of the nation's taxes. If we put these groups together, 10, 5, 4, and 1 makes 20%. This is the richest 20% of Americans, and they earn about 60% of the nation's money, and they pay about 60% of the nation's taxes. So there's no question that the poor pay less in taxes and the rich pay more. Are you okay with that? Yes or no? Here's another look, okay? The gray is going to show you the before tax income, and the orange shows you their share of federal taxes. So here you see the poorest quintile, that is the poorest fifth. They don't earn 20% of the nation's money, they earn much less than that, and their taxes, they pay very little taxes. On the other hand, let's look at the richest quintile, the richest fifth, the richest 20% of Americans. They pay a lot more than 20% of the nation's taxes. They pay about 40% of the nation's taxes, okay? And they pay a lot of taxes, okay? Here you see the top 1%. They earn a lot of money. They also pay a lot in taxes. Are you okay with that? Here it is another way. You see the bottom 20%, the poorest 20%, they do not pay a lot of federal taxes. The richest 20%, they do. They pay about 70% of federal taxes. Are you okay with that? Yes or no, and why? Here are the changes over time. So what has happened to federal tax rates on the bottom 20%? Over time, federal taxes on the poorest 20%, have they gone up or down? Let's look at the richest 20%. Have federal tax rates on the richest 20%, would you describe this as going up, going down, or more or less flat and unchanged? Here you see the middle class. What's happened to federal taxes on the middle class? Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Or have they stayed the same? Here it is again. Here's the top 1%, the richest 1% of Americans. Let's look at their average federal tax rate. Over time, it's gone from about 33% to 29%. So have taxes on the top 1% gone up, down, or stayed the same? Here's your middle 3 quintiles, your middle class, your middle 3/5. Federal taxes have gone from about 19% on average down to about 12, 13%. Have they gone up or down on the middle class? And here's your poorest quintile, your poorest fifth, your poorest 20%. Taxes have gone from about 8% down to about 2 or 3%. Have they gone up or down on the poor? Now, you can't just look at taxes, you also have to look at income. So what's happened to income over the last 50, 60 years, going back to 1967? Well, the poorest 20%, their income has been more or less going up, going down, or flat. It's gone from about 18,000 to 22,000, and you see it's in constant 2015 dollars, so it already takes into account inflation. Would you describe the poorest 20% as their income growth being big, being flat, or going down? Here's the middle class, 50th percentile. How would you describe their income growth? A big increase, a big decrease, or more or less flat? Here you see the 95th percentile, okay? So these guys are richer than 95% of Americans. How would you describe the change in their income? All right, it's gone from $117,000 on average to $214,000 on average. Would you describe that as going down, or more or less flat, or a big increase? And again, we want to compare that to taxes. So, what's the point of this graph? Okay, so here you see the share of total pre-tax income. So the top 1%, the richest 1% of Americans, owns about 16% of the nation's income, and that's about the same as the bottom 40%, the poorest 40% of Americans. So what's the point of this graph? Here you see the top income tax rate on the richest Americans. As I've told you, it was about 40%. How does that compare to the past? Well, under Democratic Clinton, it was a little bit higher. Going back here to the World War II, taxes on the rich, World War II, during the Cold War here, taxes on the rich were higher or lower than they are now. Again, now about 40% is the top income tax rate. Here you see 80, 90%. So was the top tax rate higher or lower than it is now? I like this one because it shows you the highest tax rate in blue and the lowest tax rate in orange. So, what has happened to the top tax rate on the richest Americans? Has it gone up or down over the decades? And what has happened to the tax rate on the poorest Americans? Has it gone up or down over the decades? Here you see how much money the companies are making, that's corporate profit, compared to how much the workers are getting paid, that's employee compensation. So corporate profits here as a percent of national income, are they going up or down? Are companies getting more of the pie or less of the pie? And here you see employee compensation, that's worker pay, as a percent of the national income. Are workers getting more of the pie or less of the pie? Who's doing better here, the companies or the workers? Here you see the corporate tax rate over the years. Has the corporate tax rate gone up or down over the years? I like this graph because it puts together the top income tax rate with the top corporate tax rate on companies and the capital gains tax you have to pay if you're rich and you make money off stocks and bonds. So again, here we go back to Truman and Eisenhower and Kennedy back in 1940s, 50s, 60s, and here we are more recently in 2010. So have top income taxes on the richest Americans gone up, gone down, or stayed the same? What about corporate taxes? Have they gone up, gone down, or stayed the same? And what about the capital gains tax on stocks and bonds profit? Has that gone up, down, or stayed the same? And then we're going to discuss, what do you think of all these changes? If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.